It's Christmas Eve, 1945. A mother and father in West Virginia have just tucked their 9 children into bed. The presents are wrapped. The house is warm. By morning, 5 of those children will be gone. No bodies, no remains, no answers. And for the rest of their lives, their parents will believe they didn't die in the fire. They believe their children were taken. This is the story of the Sodder children, one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in American history. George Sodder was an Italian immigrant who had built a good life for himself in Fayetteville, West Virginia. He ran a successful trucking business, and together with his wife Jenny, they raised 10 children in a 2-story wooden home on Route 16. The Sodders were well known in town, hard-working, religious, close-knit, but George was also outspoken. He was openly critical of Benito Mussolini and Italian fascism, something that, in the years leading up to World War II, made him a few enemies. In the weeks before Christmas 1945, something felt off. A stranger came to the house and told George his electrical wiring was a fire hazard. George dismissed it. There had never been any problems before. Around the same time, someone called the family home late at night and asked for a name nobody recognized. When they said no one by that name lived there, the caller laughed and hung up. And then, on Christmas Eve, someone threw a large object onto the roof. At least, that's what it sounded like. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder children went to bed, excited for Christmas morning. George stayed up a little longer before eventually falling asleep in a chair downstairs. Around 1 a.m., Jenny suddenly woke up. Something wasn't right. She smelled smoke. When she looked toward George's office, she saw flames already moving through the house. She yelled for George, grabbed their youngest daughter Sylvia, and rushed outside. 2 of the older children, Marion and George Jr., managed to escape as well, but 5 children were still inside. Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 10, Jenny, 8, and Betty, just 5 years old. George immediately tried to get back into the house, but the fire was spreading too fast. Every attempt to reach the children was blocked by flames. He even tried climbing the rock wall outside to get to the upstairs bedroom window, but couldn't make it. Then he remembered the ladder that was always kept beside the house. It wasn't there. Desperate, George ran to his 2 trucks. His plan was to drive one next to the house and climb onto the roof. Strangely, neither truck would start, even though both had been working the day before. He then rushed to a nearby water barrel for buckets of water, only to find that it had frozen solid. Meanwhile, a neighbor had noticed the fire and tried to contact the fire department. For reasons that remain unclear, help didn't arrive until around 8 o'clock that morning. By then, the house had been reduced to ashes, and the 5 missing children were nowhere to be found. Fire investigators eventually concluded that faulty wiring had caused the blaze. According to the official report, the 5 missing children had died in the fire, but the Sodders struggled to accept that explanation. Despite extensive searches of the rubble, no identifiable remains of the children were ever recovered. There were no bones, no teeth, and no evidence that 5 bodies had been inside the house when it burned. Jenny Sodder began contacting funeral directors, fire experts, and pathologists across the country. Again and again, she heard the same response. A house fire that burned for less than an hour should not have completely destroyed all traces of 5 human bodies. Trying to understand it for herself, Jenny conducted a simple experiment. She placed chicken bones in her oven and exposed them to intense heat for an extended period. When she removed them, the bones were still there. Questions continued to emerge. Investigators searching the site had reportedly discovered what they believed might be a human organ. However, laboratory testing later identified it as a cow's liver. Even more unusual, the liver showed no signs of having been exposed to the fire, leading some to suspect that it had been placed in the rubble after the fact. Then came the witness reports. One woman claimed she saw the missing children riding in a car while the Sodder house was still burning. A waitress at a restaurant roughly 50 miles away said she served breakfast to 5 children, matching their descriptions on Christmas morning, accompanied by several unfamiliar adults. A hotel employee in Charleston later reported seeing 4 of the children with 2 unknown adults. According to her account, the children appeared unusually quiet, and the adults became hostile whenever staff tried to speak with them. None of these sightings were ever conclusively verified. Still, for George and Jenny Sodder, they reinforced a growing belief that the fire was no accident, and that their children had been taken during the chaos of that night. George and Jenny Sodder never gave up looking for answers. Over the years, they hired private investigators and followed up on countless leads. George traveled across the country whenever a promising tip surfaced. The family even put up a large billboard along Route 16, displaying photographs of the 5 missing children and offering a reward for information. It remained there for decades, serving as a constant reminder that the Sodders still believed their children might be alive. As time passed, questions were also raised about the original investigation. Critics pointed to the speed with which officials concluded that the children had died in the fire. Years later, when the Sodders arranged for parts of the property to be excavated, no additional human remains were discovered, only debris from the destroyed home. The lack of evidence fueled speculation. Some believed the children may have been abducted and that the fire was used to cover up the crime. Others wondered whether George's outspoken criticism of fascism and the Italian government during World War II had made him enemies. Rumors of organized crime involvement and local corruption circulated as well, though none were ever proven. For more than 2 decades, the mystery remained unsolved. Then, in 1967, the Sodder family received a letter that would reopen old wounds and raise even more questions. In 1967, more than 20 years after the fire, an unexpected letter arrived at the Sodder home. The envelope had no return address and was postmarked from Central City, Kentucky. Inside was a single photograph. The picture showed a young man in his early 30s who bore a remarkable resemblance to Louis Sodder. If Louis had survived the fire, this was roughly the age he would have been. Written on the back of the photograph was a brief message: "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie." Beneath the note was a string of letters and numbers that has never been successfully decoded. The message only deepened the mystery. Louis had no brother named Frankie. However, Jenny Sodder did have a brother named Frank, leading the family to wonder whether the note contained a clue meant specifically for them. Determined to find answers, the Sodders hired a private investigator and sent him to Kentucky to trace the photograph's origin and identify whoever had mailed it. According to the family's account, the investigator left to pursue the lead and never reported back. They never heard from him again. The photograph remains one of the most debated pieces of evidence in the Sodder case. To some, it was proof that at least one of the missing children had survived. To others, it was simply an elaborate hoax. Either way, it ensured that the mystery would continue for decades to come. More than 80 years later, what happened to the Sodder children remains a mystery. The most straightforward explanation is that the official investigation was correct and the children died in the fire. Supporters of this theory argue that the witness sightings, the photograph, and many of the other strange details that emerged over the years can be explained by coincidence, mistaken identity, or the understandable hope of parents unwilling to accept such a devastating loss. Others believe the evidence points in a different direction. They argue that the fire was intentionally set and that the children were abducted during the chaos. Suspicion has long centered on a series of unusual events that occurred before the fire, including warnings George Sodder received about his outspoken political views, strange phone calls to the house, and reports of an object landing on the roof shortly before the blaze began. A third theory expands on the idea of an abduction. According to this possibility, the children survived and were raised elsewhere under new identities. Those who support this theory often point to the photograph mailed to the Sodder family in 1967, believing it may have been a message from someone connected to the missing children, or perhaps even one of the children themselves. Despite decades of investigation, no theory has ever been conclusively proven. The last surviving Sodder sibling, Sylvia Sodder Paxton, spent much of her life searching for answers about what happened that night. She died in 2021, still hoping that one day the truth would be uncovered. And that's what makes the Sodder case so enduring. It's not just a story about a house fire or a missing person case. It's a story about a family that spent generations searching for answers, and a mystery that to this day remains unsolved. George and Jenny Sodder never rebuilt the house. Instead, they transformed the property into a memorial for the 5 children they believed were still missing. For the rest of their lives, they continued searching for answers and following any lead that offered even the slightest possibility of hope. Jenny passed away in 1989, still convinced that her children had survived the fire. George had died years earlier without learning what happened that Christmas night. Today, the case remains officially unsolved. What began as a house fire in rural West Virginia grew into one of the most enduring mysteries in American history. 5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve in 1945, and their fate has never been conclusively determined. Were they victims of a tragic fire, or was something else happening that night? More than 80 years later, no one knows for certain.